Welcome to the 2023 Marriage Retreat. You're in the class on growing in family finances together. Like the other classes at this retreat, this class is named after a popular song. In this case, the song is Mo Money, Mo Problems. I'm Stephen, and this is Susan, and we're going to have a great time together today. This is the title slide for the retreat. We have a secondary slide for our social media channel, DeepWaters 205. This class will also be posted on DeepWaters 205. On that channel on YouTube, you will find we have posted 5 hours of marriage classes from a marriage retreat we spoke at last April. This class is a follow-on class to our Growing as Partners class that we gave at that retreat.
And just to introduce ourselves a little bit more, we live in Marietta, and we help lead the East Cobb Sandy Springs community at the North River Church of Christ. We have 3 grown children, almost getting them launched. And, we have always aimed to honor God with our finances and to be generous in the best way we could. All right. And also, Mo Money, Mo Problems. Everybody knows this, although I did not know it. I had to help my children had to help me figure this out. My son helped me to find YouTube videos on it, and I had never heard the song before. Although I did, I'm like, when I heard the intro, I'm like, I know that song. That's Diana Ross. But no, it goes to something more. It's Katie Price. But anyway, this popular song, we obviously don't endorse all the lyrics of the song, but the chorus expresses a really profound problem that even people in the world experience with money. The more money you get, the more problems. But, we think that money is going to reduce our problems. But if we don't learn how to handle money spiritually, the small problems you have with a little money become bigger problems when you have more money.
That is a really important point.
Mm-hmm.
A very important point. That if we don't learn to handle our money spiritually, when we have a little money, then we're going to have just as much and even more problems when we have more money. And what happens is we make commitments that are bigger when we have more money to make commitments with. We get in debt more. We commit to bigger purchases. And there never seems to be enough money. And of course, that's the spirit of the chorus of this song, is that even in the world's view, with more money comes more problems. And we want to avoid that. So we're going to go to Jesus in order to learn some things tonight or today. So this is an overview slide of how Susan and I understand Christian marriage. And this is the outline, essentially, of the marriage retreat and the other content that you'll find at our social media site, that building a great Christian marriage is about building these 3 layers. That is, building a great foundation of being great friends and always growing as friends. And on top of that, we build a layer of being great partners and always growing as partners. And then the cherry on top, the whipped cream, right, is being great lovers and always growing as lovers. And these are 3 layers. If you look to the right, we've got words that elaborate on each of these 3 layers. And you look to the right of great partners. And right nestled in there's finances. In order to be great partners with our spouses, we have to be great partners in handling money. Handling money is one of the key pitfalls of marriages, and why a lot of marriages end in divorce, or why they have a variety of marriage problems.
Right.
Because they have not figured out how to handle money in a spiritual, unified way. So it's that one little word that we're going to be elaborating on for today's class.
Okay, now in 40 minutes, we can't cover everything there is to say about spiritual family finances.
Instead, what we've done is we've identified on this slide a variety of what we call spiritual financial proficiencies. So we've written them down sort of from the high level to the low level, and what we're going to be able to cover is in this class is really an introduction to the top three. So values and priorities, that's right. Do we have spiritual values and spiritual priorities that govern the use of our money? Have we actually engaged in a process of high-level budgeting, which commits our values and priorities to paper, or commits it to a plan that we can discuss, modify over time, and agree on, that we can communicate about and reach unity about? Now, there's lots of other things that we're not going to be covering in detail in this class. One is just managing your career, and that has to do with continuing to manage income growth with satisfaction throughout your life. That if you don't have a good handle on a career track, then you're not going to be able to grow your income over time, and that means that some things you may do great with now, or when you're early in your marriage, may become difficult because your expenses expand as your kids come and so forth. So managing income growth throughout your career is important. Paying bills. Okay, we're not going to talk about the nuts and bolts of paying bills. We'll just touch on it a little bit. We're not going to talk about tracking and controlling expenses. And this is the nuts and bolts of what people often think of when they think about budgeting. We're not going to talk about saving, short-term saving and long-term saving, and investing. That is, we're not going to talk about the specifics of those, only the fact that you need to do them and that they need to factor in your high-level budget. We're not going to talk about debt, about incurring debt, about managing debt, about paying debt down. Those are all important things. They're all important spiritual financial proficiencies, but it's not what we're going to be addressing in this class. We're not going to talk about lending. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to lend money, to be open-handed with your money, to help others out in their times of need. The problem is that there are problems associated with lending, and you can actually destroy relationships if you lend money to people you love, but don't do it in a spiritual way. So we're not going to be covering that, but that's an important thing to learn in due course. Then there are all kinds of extended family issues, parents and siblings and other relatives. That those are important issues to learn how to handle spiritually. And then there's teaching finances to your children. There are lots of really good things to learn there. We're not going to be covering that, but I wanted to go over sort of the scope of what we think of as spiritual financial proficiencies, so you know that we're not just ignorant of the other things. We only have time to cover the top level.
Okay, and it's important for us to really look to the Bible. If we want to be proficient in something, what does God, our greatest priority is to look to God to set our values and priorities. So we're going to be focusing in Matthew 6 in this passage here. And let's start with Matthew 6, verse 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Thank you, Susan. So Susan and I, when we were preparing for this class, we looked at each other and we said, what is it we're particularly good at? What has God done great work in our lives in this area? And what are the verses that are particularly motivating to us? And we came up with our 3 favorite scriptures on money in the Bible, and it turns out they were all in Matthew chapter 6.
Yeah.
So this is the first one, and it's not actually the first one. Yeah, it is the first one.
It is, yeah.
So one of the myths about money is this notion of financial security. Financial security has a certain amount of truth, but what really is deceptive about the notion of financial security is that we can possibly attain true security in life through money. Jesus points out here that possessions have downfalls, that moths and vermin destroy. Okay, and they could be other things besides moth and vermin. They could be a house fire. They could be
flood or a tornado,
a flood or burst pipes.
Yeah.
Ruining your carpets. The fact is that possessions are unsure. They do not make someone secure. Also, there's the whole idea of thieves. We've had identity theft befall us, and some of you may have as well. So people can steal your money, even from your accounts. They can buy things on your credit cards. The fact is that this world we live in is not secured by money. Now, that having been said, it is important to handle your money well so that you are not stuck in a bad situation. But Jesus says the priority you should have is to think about treasures that you have in heaven and storing up for yourselves those treasures. Focus on making a secure life for yourself for eternity. And then as you focus on taking care of matters in this life, you will be truly secured in the long run, in the long run. Mm-hmm. So we will talk on the next slide about what treasures in heaven are. But here's another super important principle from Jesus' own lips. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I don't know a single person in this room, and frankly, I have never met a person who I think would not really care about having a good heart. We want good hearts, don't we? We want to have a good heart. Do you realize that what you do with your money, the decisions that you make with your money, that we make with our finances, that God has given us, of course, it will steer our hearts. Whatever we do with our money, our hearts will follow. And so you see what Jesus' point here is, if money and possessions are your treasure, then your heart will be damaged. But if your treasure is on things that are eternal, then that's where your heart will be. Mm-hmm. And your heart will be more the heart that you truly desire and that you were made for and that Jesus wishes for you.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about our treasures in heaven. So what are our treasures in heaven?
Well, here are 3 things that Susan and I have mm-hmm. thought through and that we conclude represent treasures in heaven. Actually, no, the 5 things which are the treasures in heaven are at the bottom. Let me just talk about these 3 things up at the top. Right? How we use our money affects our hearts. So this is a little bit summary of what I said on the previous slide. How we use our money affects our hearts. That is a principle which every one of us would do well to understand and remember. Every decision you make about money will affect your heart. Do you want a good heart? Use money for eternal things. These are important principles. So what are treasures in heaven? Well, these are some things we came up. Jesus didn't enumerate them, okay? He did not enumerate them, but these are some of the things that we came up with that we think are consistent with Jesus' teachings about storing up treasures in heaven. First of all, the one antidote for greed is generosity. And so everyday generosity is laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven. It's being able to part with some of your money and be able to do something nice for another. It could be as simple as gift giving, or it could be as simple as helping a friend out when they're in a difficult time of need. It could be taking them food. Right. Taking them meals. This is everyday generosity. Does this cost money? Yes, it does. It costs money. But if you want to be able to do nice things for people, good things for people, it's going to cost money. And if you have a heart of everyday generosity, then you'll be able to do these things for people without even thinking about the cost. Now, you do have to do certain things so that you have extra money to spare. If you don't do the proper things to prepare, then when you try to be everyday generous, you will find yourself putting yourself in a bind.
Another way to store up treasures for heaven is to being hospitable. It, again, like Steve said, it costs money to have people into your home. I mean, you could say you spend more water, you use more electricity, but you put out a spread, you have people over for meals. That is all hospitality. Your house gets a lot of wear and tear from hospitality. We always say if we didn't have children or pets or people over, that our house would be pristine. But there stains on the carpet, there nicks in the paint, things get broken, but it's all about, I'd much rather have people in my home and things get ruined than to be selfish about that, because I know people feel loved, they feel cared for. I know I'm building treasures in heaven with being hospitable.
Another way, it's kind of obvious, is just weekly church giving, and as we make Jesus' church a priority, right? Because churches are not merely human institutions. Some of them do better at obeying God than others, but we desire to be a part of a church that is truly following Jesus and that really lives in such a way that Jesus is living in that church. And as a result, church giving is a spiritual act, right? As we part with our money, and not in small amounts, in amounts that are challenging, that are painful sometimes, right? It does. Then we are storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven. We're aligning our interests with the priorities of God. A lot of us also are in churches that have special annual contributions. So there's figuring that out too. Then a fifth way to store treasures in heaven is just doing things with your money which allow you to be in a better financial situation in the future. And that will ensure that you're able to be generous, not just today and tomorrow, but next year, 5 years from now, 10, 20, 30 years from now. So the idea that you're not just storing these things up for yourself, you're storing them, you're putting them to good use so that you can be generous your whole life long. So what is high-level budgeting? Let me just say that high-level budgeting, budgeting can be a scary word.
And high level budgeting is a way that we prepare together as a married couple to store up treasures in heaven. And some ways that we do this is unity in our shared priorities. And also, we talk through our priorities and, finding unity, it isn't just magically appears a lot of times. You may have to talk through things, but you're going to have to work together to find your unity and shared priorities. Yeah. Also, coming up together with a plan for meeting needs and generosity. It might be that y'all love having people over for dinner, so you may figure out, let's cut back in this area so our grocery bill can be higher. You figure out that. And then also having a guide for when to say no. One area that we generally have, if a child comes by and they're fundraising for a band, or somebody wants to go on a mission trip and they know we have a level that we've set that we can automatically give to that without really having to consult with the other person.
But we pretty much always say yes to those things.
Yeah, we usually always say yes to those things. But you also have a guide for when to say no. Like, you know what, we've already done this so much, we can't do any more this month. Or I'd rather contribute to this rather than that. But anyway, you work together to have unity in that. And it's okay to say no.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit more about budgeting being a scary word. If someone came up to you and said, how are you and your husband, or how are you and your wife on budgeting? Are you really good with keeping to your budget? Well, let me just say, if someone asked us that, we would wince a little bit, because the issues of low-level expense tracking and control, we're not really that good at that. So, but what we are really good at is we're very good at living well within our means, well below our income, so that we can be generous on every occasion.
Right.
And we really have done a great job, I think. Susan, maybe I think you agree.
I agree.
At being really unified about our priorities. Like, for instance, we both love to be hospitable. We both love to have people, and we don't worry about how much it costs.
Right.
We're doing steak for 15 people now, and we don't worry about what it costs.
Right. Or we're having the regular campus dinners, and we don't worry about what that costs.
That's right. I mean, we try to make sensible decisions about value for money, but we don't worry. But we have shared priorities about what things are important to us.
Right.
And as a result, we don't have a lot of marital conflicts about money. And oh, by the way, our budget, our high-level budget, if you will, has made a plan so that we can do these things. And we've been able to be generous over the 30 years of our marriage. And yeah, when to say no, it's just that we each have a sense for what is a level of expenditure that we really need to talk to each other about before we make it.
Right.
And sometimes Susan doesn't know that something's tight because I do the bills.
Right.
And so, but she knows there's a certain level at which an expense would be something that she would need to talk to me about.
Right.
And I would know the same. So, and I don't treat that as one of us has to check with the other and not the other way around. No, we want unity. And so we check with one another. But let's get back to this whole idea of high-level budgeting. And this is going to be something that I'm going to ask every one of you who hears this. Every one of you, I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you, that you and your spouse do a high-level budget. Because if you don't do a high-level budget, you won't have any of those first three things.
Right.
But let me explain what a high-level budget is. It's not that intimidating. It's simply an estimate of an average month.
Right.
What is your income and what are the various expenses that you have? So you need to include lines for your average monthly income, your expenses, and all bills that you have. Ideally, with what days of the month are those bills due, or does that income hit your bank account? And if you're in tight cash flow situations, then knowing the exact days of month or approximate days of month that the bills hit will help you plan for how you're gonna which bills you're gonna pay on which dates. Now, let me just say that Susan and I, we operate with enough surplus that we never have to do that. Okay, we pay our bills just as soon as we can get around to it, and we pay everything off in full. We pay our credit cards off in full every month. We have paid down our long-term debts down to zero. So we don't really have to worry about what day of the month does a bill become due. We just know if we've got the bill, we've got the money, we pay it. We don't even worry about, oh, I could pay this 7 days later and make a little bit more on the interest while I hold the money. We don't worry about that. We'd rather just pay it. We pay it early. We become a good customer to the people to whom we owe the money.
Now, and it hasn't always been like that. I mean, things were different 30 years ago, but that's kind of, as you're starting out, things are a little tighter.
Well, I will say that we've always spent well below our earnings.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So as a result, we've always had
the money
suitable
to take care of the expenses. Yes.
And there have been a few times where the money has gotten tight, particularly in between jobs.
Yeah.
That gets tricky.
Always tight.
But let's talk about what a high-level budget consists of. First of all, if you look at your gross income, the government is going to take tax out. And depending on the number of deductions you've got and your various life circumstances, it may not be the full tax bracket amount that gets taken. You may have anywhere from 10 to 30% for most of us. Now, let me just say that taxes, we usually don't think about how much taxes are taken out. The U.S. has a really creative system of just deducting it from your paycheck. And then hopefully you don't have to pay more at tax time. But the bottom line is that when you consider all the deductions and so forth, most of us are going to be in the realm where 10 to 30% of our gross, and it depends how many child deductions you have and so forth, whether you're closer actually to 10. Obviously, the more you make, the higher the tax bracket is. But I just said, for simplicity purposes, when we think about our gross income, right, 20% is going to get taken out for taxes. It may be 10, it may be 30, but a big chunk is going to come out for taxes. And then, what we do is we just say, okay, at a minimum, when we're doing budgeting, at a minimum, we're just going to allocate 10% for weekly church giving. And, Jesus didn't really have a lot to say about the tithe, okay? The Old Testament sets a precedent of 10%. That's the meaning of the word tithe. So it is not mandatory for Christians to give 10%. Hopefully you can give more. Hopefully you can be generous without thinking about the exact amounts. But we generally start with, okay, 10% we want to be able to give to the church in weekly giving. And we're giving out of the first fruits. That's why we have it as the next line item after taxes. Okay? Long-term savings. And when I say long-term savings, some of us may have long-term debt that we want to pay down. And the bottom line is, if we're saving while we're allowing ourselves to maintain long-term debt, then it's kind of, what are we actually doing? We're saving, but we've got long-term debt we're paying lots of interest on. So paying down long-term debt can be seen as savings. If you pay down debt, so Our house is paid off. Our cars are paid off. Our educational loans are paid off. And oh, by the way, we're retired. So we're not saving anymore. We're drawing on the nest egg that we've built up. But set aside 10% for long-term saving, right? For either paying down debt or putting it away for retirement. Also, one of the things people miss is 10% short-term savings, right? Things always come up, don't they?
Yeah.
They always come up. And if you don't have 10% available to pay for the things that come up, then you're going to be caught in a bind. And then you're not going to be able to pay your bills. The 50%, then 50% is what you got to live on. And by the way, the 10% short-term savings, you know all about building up the emergency fund and so forth. So hopefully you don't spend your short-term savings. But your short-term savings can go to building up not only an emergency fund, but going to build up savings for the vacation you want to go on, or savings for unexpected expenses that come up. So when people see, I've got to live on 50% of my gross income, it can come as a shock. Okay? If you want to have plenty, and if you want to live within your means, it really means when you add up all your bills, they need to be about 50% of your income, not 80, 90% of your income, or you will have mo problems, regardless whether you got mo money or not.
All right. So with this assignment, it's good to talk to your spouse about your values and priorities, and then go through that high-level budgeting and kind of see where you are. It might be a goal you want to work to. I mean, maybe right now you're at 90% or 95% on all your expenses. But it's like, our values, let's grow in this. Let's work toward this. And, that was an area where we grew in as incomes increased. We made sure just because your incomes increased doesn't mean we have to move into a bigger house. It could be that we put more money towards savings. But, discuss with agreeing on your high level budget, ask yourself the questions: does it store up treasures in heaven? Will it take your heart where you want your heart to go? Is the fancier car, is that going to really be what I want to project to? And it may be. I mean, some people cost out and say, this car is a really good quality car. I know our repairs will be cheaper, gas will go down. So, sometimes there are decisions you make that are, you've figured it out and it's a good thing. You may decide a good value. You may decide, my elderly parents are going to need to move in with us in 10 years. A bigger house makes a lot more sense. So, there are decisions you make that it can go toward your values of caring for your family, being able to have people in more.
So if you're in this class, we beseech you, do a long-term budget, do this homework. Do a high-level budget. Do a high-level budget, do this homework. If you came to this class, please do these exercises together, and we're through the next two verses that we're going to cover, we're going to add questions to this. So really, it's just going to be one slide at the end with discussing your values and priorities together and agreeing on a high-level budget together. Okay? And then these are the first three questions.
All right, let's go to the next verse. In Matthew 6, verse 24, it says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money.
I've struggled for a long time with this verse. And it's because how do you balance it? I mean, I love money a little bit. I mean, but this says you cannot serve both God and money. So is it that I love God 90% and I love money 10%? Is that good enough? And this is the formula we came up with to help us understand that verse. What does it mean when Jesus says you cannot love both God and money? So this is the way we make sense of it. First of all, we know that loving God is loving people, right? Jesus said the greatest commandment was to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But the second is just like it, right? The second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So loving God and loving people are interconnected. And money is a tool for loving people. So in so much as money is a tool that we use instead of something we love and seek, then that puts a whole new light on it. In fact, the world loves money and uses people. But we as Christians, we love people and we use money. So as long as you're using money, not loving it, right? We love people, use money. We don't love money and use people. So as long as you're using money, not loving it, and you're thinking about how do I put this to the greatest possible use for which God gave it to me, right? It's about using money, not about loving it. So every dollar we own is God's, am I right?
Right.
So how will we use God's money to meet the needs of people? And by the way, your family is included in that, right? Loving other people includes, and to some extent starts with, your family. It extends from your family to the church and beyond, your neighbor, the community, right? How do you use money in order to love people? So to extend the homework, does it reflect God's ownership? Right? These are discussion questions that we want you to discuss one with another after you've done your high-level budget. Right? Does it meet needs and love people?
Okay. Now let's go on to the next verse. It's Matthew 6, verse 25 through 34. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than the clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not store or reap or store away. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life?
I know that we've all struggled with this verse, right? I mean, don't worry, God takes care of the birds. Well, have you ever looked at a bird out in your yard? What's it doing? It is working.
It's working hard.
It is working, and it's eating seeds. Okay, let's not go into the worm stuff. Okay, it's eating seeds, right? Birds have a very modest diet. Okay, they're eating seeds, bugs, and worms. So birds are working really hard. In fact, what was it, like 80% of a bird's waking life is spent
It's
hunting for food.
Yeah.
Or building a nest, probably.
Yeah.
So birds work really hard. But you know what? God takes care of them. Something to think about. Are birds worried? Evidently not. Okay? They just do what it takes to gather the food. And then they seem to be living a good life. Let's move on to further through the passage, and it elaborates this in lilies.
Okay.
Susan?
And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? And what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them.
Now, you've also wrestled with this one. Now, you may have just lumped them together, but there's some different aspects to this. He says, consider the lilies. They've been arrayed with splendor. Okay, have you ever thought about the splendor of Solomon? Do the splendor of the lilies really compare with the splendor of King Solomon? He was one of the richest men of all time, who had, gold coming out his ears. The splendor of Solomon is amazing, isn't it? Well, here's where it takes a values shift. Here's where Jesus is saying, if you really want the splendor of Solomon, guess what? You're never really going to have it. You know, Solomon documented his life journey, right, and his philosophical thought process in the book of Ecclesiastes. And he just said, you know what? I always wanted more, and it was never enough. It was never enough. Now, have you ever actually looked really close at a flower or any object of nature? It is magnificent in its own way. It's a completely different way. Mm-hmm. The splendor of a lily is different than the splendor of Solomon. And we'll get back to this on a summary slide, but one of our secret sauce in personal finances, marriage finances, family finances is it's twofold. It's choose modest tastes and spend less than you earn. Mm-hmm. Now, the second one may seem obvious, but choose modest taste. You know, this passage talks about, and Jesus takes it almost for granted. He says, "Oh, consider the lilies of the field. You know, they're splendid. I mean, Solomon in all his glory wasn't arrayed like one of them." Is that our perspective? It may not be naturally our perspective. It's certainly not the world's perspective. Mm-hmm. So to choose to look at the world and what's important through the lens of Jesus, right? To choose modest tastes, because the splendor of Solomon was really not that splendid. And it really didn't endure, going back to the treasures in heaven notion. So he says, don't worry, God will take care of you. In fact, Susan, why don't you read this verse?
But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own.
So here's our summary slide, right? Must we worry? I mean, worrying's really easy, isn't it? Particularly when money is tight. And when is money not tight? Money always seems to be a bit tight. Does God really provide? So in summary, right, the birds, they work hard. They eat seeds, modest tastes. The lilies. And we were thinking and talking about this. What is it about the lilies?
What do they do?
What do they do? You know, they just sit there. You know what they do? They absorb what God provides, and then they radiate. Lilies are just radiant. And it's because they take the water, the sunlight, the nutrients, whatever they get from the soil, right? I mean, they're living in dirt, but they're just absorbing what God provides, and they're radiant as a result. So the question is, if we were doing this, if we worked hard 8 seeds instead of, or whatever. You get the idea. If we had modest tastes, if we absorbed what God provided and radiated as a result, could we be content? Would we be abundantly content? Would we be so content that people would look at our lives and say, wow, they're just amazing. They are so content. They're happy with what they've got. Or must we be like Solomon? So choose modest taste. Live within your means. Spend less than you earn. So once we understand the needs, these are the two options that Jesus gives to us in this passage. We can either work or be lazy and worry. That's one option. Or we can work, we can absorb what God provides, we can choose good priorities to put the kingdom of God first in everything, and we can trust God to come through. And this is Jesus' recipe for contentment. Now, note the work and absorb, those are things that are on us. We've got to do stuff there. So our additional questions that we add, right? These are things to discuss between yourselves. How should we seek the kingdom first? Please have that conversation. Don't think, oh, I've read this verse a bunch of times. We don't have to have the conversation. Have this conversation. Go all through all these questions with regard to your high-level budget, right? How should we seek the kingdom first? Do we trust this promise? I mean, that is a challenge. Do we trust this promise that Jesus gives? Put your priorities right. Seek the kingdom first. God will provide. It is a challenge. It does require trust. It does require faith. How can we help each other worry less? How can we help each other? You may have different strengths, as we just learned in the previous class. One of you may be able to handle stress better than others, better than the other. How can you help each other worry less? How can we have modest tastes? What actions do we need to take? It's not just about sitting back and trusting the promise. Those birds got to get out there and hoof it. They got to work. They got to do the work. So sometimes you need to do additional things in order. You got to take additional actions. Who is going to pay the bills with the support from the other? That's something you clearly need to work out. If you've been married more than a month, you've already basically worked that out. So, but you may need to talk about, do you feel supported by me if you're not the one who is doing the bills, right? You need to trust one another and support one another. What can we each do to reduce expenses, right? That follows on the modest tastes. Susan, do you have any more you want to add to that?
With doing the bills, I was just thinking, sometimes neither one of you likes this. It's not a strength of either one of you's.
Like for us. It's not a strength of either of us.
Yeah. But it's like who hates it less might be the one. And then sometimes it's like, one of us will say, when we talk about supporting each other, it's just like, oh, I've got to do the bills tonight. And the support is not like, oh, glad he's doing that because I really hate it. It's like, let's sit together and I'll sit with you to do them. And so maybe something you do together, but anyway.
Like taxes.
Oh, yes.
Okay? I mean, we put that off. It's the end of April. Our accounting...
March.
Or at the end of March, yeah. Okay, our accounting firm is bugging us for the documentation. We're like, oh, Susan, will you sit with me?
Yeah.
Okay, and sometimes she'll just sit with me and support me, and I'm like, after 15 minutes, it's like, okay, I'm on a roll now. You can go. Thank you so much. But just having support, right, sometimes helps. Or if it's like, we don't have enough money to make ends meet this month. pulling the spouse in and just sharing that with them, being humble, that helps you get through it together so that the finances don't drive a wedge between you.
Right.
Support for one another is really important. And, Susan did the bills until her first pregnancy. And then she said, I need you to do the bills from now on.
Second child, yeah.
Yeah, first pregnancy.
Okay.
So we adopted our first. So, yeah. Okay, anyway, you get the idea. I'm moving on toward Q&A. Here's some follow-up. So that's that. We've got 5 hours more of marriage material on our DeepWaters 205 channel. And by the way, if you want to engage in an ongoing basis with us, or maybe me, because I'm the one who's doing the social media channel more than Susan. If you want to, you can contact me on social media. The help I'm offering is engagement in a live recorded YouTube web show. Okay, so if you don't want it, to be recorded on a web show, then we will have more limited capacity to engage you. But anyone who wants to be involved in ongoing discussions about this or other marriage topics on a YouTube web show, please contact us. We'll see what the schedule is. Here we are at Q&A. So we're done with our presentation. Are there any questions? And by the way, I've put up these list of spiritual financial proficiencies. You can ask questions about any of them if the class didn't cover it.